The wind sweeps across the Great Plains with a force that feels almost alive, a cold breath stretching endlessly over open land. On nights when winter tightens its grip, the air cuts sharper than any blade, and blizzards rise like walls of white swallowing the horizon. In the middle of that frozen chaos stands a tipi, a shelter so thin it seems impossible that it could withstand even a single hour of the storm. To most of us, it looks fragile in a way that feels unsettling. Yet inside that cone of hides and poles, whole families once slept through the night and woke to see the sunrise. They did it without insulated walls, without heated floors, without any of the comforts that modern life makes us believe are essential. What kept them warm was not luck, it was knowledge. For the native peoples of the Great Plains, winter was a test that returned every year. It was not a challenge solved by tools, but by understanding. They learned to shape the land into a shield, to guide fire like an old friend, and to use the smallest details of nature as armor against the cold. Every method they used came from generations of refinement, tiny discoveries passed down through memory rather than paper. In their world, winter was not an enemy to fight. It was a force to respect and outthink. Tonight, as we retrace their steps, you will see how people once transformed the harshest conditions into a space of warmth and safety. You will discover 7 survival systems so ingenious that even the most advanced modern gear struggles to match them. From snow walls to heated stones to the steam-filled shelter of a sweat lodge, each technique reveals a truth about human resilience and the wisdom carried through time. Before we go deeper, imagine the storm outside. Now, imagine knowing exactly how to survive it. When the storm pressed hardest against the plains, the first line of defense was not fire, it was snow itself. That may sound impossible at first, because in our minds snow is only cold. It is something that freezes fingertips and makes breath turn brittle in the air. But for native families who lived in tipis, snow was a resource waiting to be shaped. When winds began to howl and drifts built up around the lodges, people stepped outside with shovels, sticks, or even their bare hands. They packed snow tightly around the base of the teepee, forming a ring that could rise to the height of a grown man's waist. Some families built a second ring a few steps farther out, creating a double barrier. Others shaped their walls in the curve of a letter C, opening it toward the direction that best guided the wind away from the entrance. From a distance, the tipis looked as if they were sinking into the earth. From the inside, the difference was unmistakable. Packed snow holds countless tiny pockets of still air. Those pockets act as a natural insulator, slowing the escape of heat and softening the bite of incoming wind. Even a few degrees of warmth can decide whether a family wakes comfortably or shivers through the night. The snow walls also stopped drafts that tried to slip under the edge of the tipi. Instead of sliding into the living space, cold air was forced upward and carried away. Modern engineers would call this a manipulation of airflow, but to the people who lived here, it was simply common sense. They saw the storm not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Snow may have fallen from the sky as a threat, yet in their hands it became a shield. Children often joined in building the walls, laughing in the cold as they helped create the barrier that would keep everyone safe. By the time the storm reached its peak, the teepee stood wrapped in a thick white embrace. What looked fragile from the outside had now become a fortress built from the very thing most of us fear. Once the snow walls stood firm, the next source of warmth came from the heart of the tipi itself, a fire that was far more sophisticated than it first appeared. Lighting a fire inside a structure made of hides and poles might sound reckless to someone today, but for native families, it was the center of life and the silent partner that helped them face the coldest nights. The fire pit was never placed randomly. It was dug shallow and set precisely in the middle of the lodge. A shallow pit allowed the flames to rise with steady warmth without sending sparks too high, while the central position spread heat evenly in every direction. Around the edge of the pit, stones were often arranged in a careful ring, giving the fire a boundary and helping it retain heat long after the flames settled into glowing embers. Above the fire, the structure of the teepee worked like a natural chimney. At the very top, 2 flaps could be opened or closed depending on the wind. If the storm pushed from the east, the western flap was opened to guide smoke out. If the wind shifted, so did the flaps. Near the bottom of the lodge, small gaps allowed cold, clean air to enter. Warm air rose through the center, carrying smoke upward, while fresh air flowed in low to feed the flames. Without writing a single formula, these families mastered the physics of convection. Their lodge breathed. It inhaled cold air and exhaled smoke and heat. Through the night, adults took turns tending the fire. They adjusted logs, watched the direction of sparks, and guarded the balance between warmth and safety. It was a responsibility taken with pride, a role that tied a person to their family's survival. While the storm raged outside, the fire inside held steady, a quiet and deliberate flame against the winter darkness. Even with a well-tended fire burning through the night, the cold could still creep across the ground and steal warmth from anyone trying to sleep. This was where another piece of ancient ingenuity came into play, a method so simple yet so effective that it feels almost timeless. Families gathered smooth, dense stones, often basalt or granite, the types of rock that could withstand intense heat without cracking. These stones were placed deep in the glowing embers of the central fire and left there until they held heat all the way through, not just on the surface but in their core. When the time was right, the stones were lifted out with care, wrapped in layers of soft hide, and carried to the sleeping area like precious treasures. Once tucked under blankets or placed near the feet, the stones released warmth slowly, hour after hour, turning icy bedding into a cocoon of gentle heat. The secret behind this was the natural high heat capacity of the stone. It absorbed energy over time and let it out gradually, creating a steady warmth that no flickering flame could match. Some families used a combination of large stones for long-lasting heat and smaller ones to warm the edges of the bedding more quickly. Others wrapped their stones in deer hide, which helped soften the heat and extend its life even longer. To the children, these heated stones were more than survival tools. They were the hearts of the night, warm, glowing companions hidden beneath layers of fur. In many stories, the stones were described as gifts from the earth itself, rising from the fire like pieces of living warmth. While modern campers rely on electric blankets or chemical heat packs, these ancient families used nothing but fire, rock, and understanding. And in the heart of winter, that simple combination was enough to push back the cold and fill the dark hours with comfort. While heated stones brought warmth to the bedding, the cold outside still reached for exposed skin, especially when families had to step out of the lodge or move between tasks. This was where another layer of ancient knowledge revealed itself, a form of protection that worked at the level of the skin. Long before modern lotions promised barrier protection, native people created their own defense using the simplest materials around them. They took thick animal fat, often from bison, bear, or beaver, and warmed it gently until it softened. Then they spread it across the face, arms, and any part of the body likely to face the wind. Once the fat settled into a smooth layer, they dusted it lightly with powdered ash gathered from willow or cedar fires. To someone today, this mixture might sound unusual, but it created a powerful shield. The fat sealed the skin from the wind, slowing the loss of heat, while the ash added texture and tiny particles of carbon that absorbed warmth and released it slowly. Together, they acted like a second skin, a natural coating that trapped a thin layer of heat close to the body. In freezing winds, that layer could mean the difference between staying warm and losing feeling in the fingertips or face. The mixture also helped dry the skin and wick away moisture, which was essential in cold climates where dampness could become dangerous. This practice held deeper meaning as well. Some groups saw the ash as a symbol of the ancestors, a reminder that every person carried the memory of those who had endured winters before them. Warriors sometimes applied the mixture before traveling, believing it gave them the toughness of the animals that provided the fat. Children watched their parents prepare the blend and learned that survival did not always come from heavy clothing. Sometimes it came from understanding how the world worked at its smallest details. With nothing more than fat and ash, these families created a living barrier against the cold, proving once again that knowledge could outmatch even the harshest storm. Even with a protective layer on their skin, warmth still depended heavily on what people wore, especially during long nights when temperatures fell without mercy. In those moments, one of the most reliable defenses came from something small and humble: the rabbit. Throughout the Great Plains and the Great Basin, many native families turned to rabbit fur as their main source of insulation. Rabbits were plentiful. Their coats were incredibly soft, and most importantly, their fur trapped air better than almost any other small game animal. That trapped air became a natural blanket of warmth, held close to the body with surprising efficiency. But a single rabbit hide tore easily, and the skin underneath was far too thin to survive the harsh season alone. So families stitched together dozens, sometimes more than 100 small pelts, weaving them into large blankets, cloaks, and underlayers. Each piece fit together like part of a delicate puzzle, creating a quilt of fur that wrapped the wearer in a thick, breathable shield. The work was slow and required patience. The hides had to be cleaned, dried, and cut carefully. The seams had to be tight enough to hold, but flexible enough to move with the body. Yet when the final piece came together, the result was far more than a simple garment. It was a handcrafted layer of survival. Children often curled up inside these blankets at night, disappearing into the warmth as though sinking into a nest. Some families decorated their rabbit fur garments with small marks or patterns, reminders that every stitch connected generations. Compared to the modern fleece jackets and thermal liners we buy today, these hand-stitched rabbit garments may look simple, but they followed the same principle. Warmth does not come from the thickness of the material alone. It comes from the air it traps. The people who crafted these garments discovered that truth long before synthetic fabrics or brand names ever existed. Wrapped in rabbit fur, they carried not only warmth but the patience, skill, and tradition of their ancestors. Warm clothing and heated stones kept the body safe from the cold air above. But there was another enemy waiting quietly beneath every sleeper: the ground itself. Even on nights when the fire burned steadily, the earth pulled heat downward with a strength that surprised anyone unfamiliar with winter on the plains. People who slept directly on the frozen ground often woke up shivering no matter how many blankets they used. Native families learned this lesson early. They understood that surviving the night meant building protection from below just as carefully as from above. To solve this, they designed what could only be described as a layered system of natural insulation. The first layer was a thick mat woven from willow branches or similar plants, tightly braided to create both structure and air pockets. This base lifted the sleeper off the soil and stopped the first wave of cold from creeping upward. On top of that came a second layer made from dry grasses, reeds, or in some regions, soft moss gathered during warmer seasons. These materials created a cushion of trapped air, adding both comfort and insulation. Finally, the top layer was placed, a heavy buffalo hide with the fur facing upward. The fur held body heat close, while the thick hide below acted as a barrier, stopping drafts and locking warmth inside the sleeping space. Some tribes went even further by shaping the ground itself before laying down the bedding. They packed soil during the day so the sun or the fire's radiant heat could warm it slightly. When night came, that firm earth released a small but steady warmth that made a noticeable difference. As simple as it looked, this three-layer system echoed the same principles behind modern insulated pads, luxury mattresses, and heated floors. It relied on trapped air, steady structure, and thoughtful layering. With nothing more than willow, grass, hide, and knowledge, these families built beds that turned frozen ground into a place of rest and safety. Even with layered bedding and warm hides, there was one more challenge that every family faced before sleeping through a winter night: the cold that settled deep inside the body after a long day in freezing air. Clothes could warm the skin, and fire could warm the lodge, but true warmth started from within. That understanding led to one of the most remarkable survival practices among native communities: the sweat lodge. To someone today, it might look like a small dome-shaped hut made of bent willow branches and covered with hides. But to the people who relied on it, the sweat lodge was a place where the body could reset itself before facing the dark hours ahead. Inside the lodge, smooth stones heated to glowing red were placed in a central pit. Water was poured over them using wooden ladles or carved horns, and the stones hissed as thick waves of steam filled the small space. The heat wrapped around every person inside, loosening cold, stiff muscles and driving out the chill that clung to the skin. People stayed until their bodies warmed completely and sweat ran freely. This was not a moment of luxury. It was a preparation for survival. By raising their core temperature, they gave themselves hours of stored warmth when they later returned to the tipi. Sweating also dried the skin and removed lingering moisture, which could be dangerous once the temperature dropped. But the sweat lodge was more than physical heat. It carried deep cultural meaning. Many saw it as a place of renewal, a space where prayers mixed with steam and songs echoed softly beneath the hides. Some described it as returning to the warmth of the earth's center, a symbolic shelter within a shelter. When the session was done and families stepped back into the cold, their bodies felt light, their skin dry, and their inner warmth steady. Modern spas may offer saunas with scented oils and soft towels, but none of them compare to the raw purpose and wisdom of the sweat lodge. It was not built for comfort. It was built for life. When you look back at everything these families did to survive the winter, a pattern begins to emerge. Each method on its own was powerful, but together they formed a complete system, a layered approach to warmth that touched every part of life. The snow walls redirected the wind and built a barrier from the very thing that threatened them. The fire in the center created a steady heartbeat of heat, carefully shaped by airflow and the wisdom of those who tended it. Heated stones became companions through the night, storing the day's energy and releasing it gently until dawn. The mixture of fat and ash protected exposed skin, forming a quiet shield against the bitter wind. Rabbit fur garments held warmth close, with countless tiny pockets of air, each one stitched by patient hands. The layered bedding turned frozen ground into a resting place that felt almost alive, and the sweat lodge prepared the body from within, filling every person with the warmth and clarity they needed to face the cold outside. All of these techniques revealed something far deeper than simple survival hacks. They showed how knowledge, when passed through generations and shaped by experience, becomes a lifeline stronger than any tool or piece of equipment. Modern technology often gives us the illusion that comfort is automatic, that warmth comes from a switch or a button. But long before electric heaters or insulated walls existed, people stood against winter with nothing but their understanding and their will to endure. Their shelters were made of hides and poles, yet they created warmth where most of us would see only danger. As you sit in your home today, surrounded by modern comforts and steady heat, it is worth remembering that entire families once faced storms without any of these things. They survived because they learned, they adapted, and they trusted the knowledge handed down to them. So now, after hearing these 7 remarkable methods, which one surprised you the most? Share your thoughts, and if you want to explore more lessons from the people who mastered survival long before us, be sure to subscribe. Storms do not care about comfort, but knowledge always lights a path through the cold.